everyone to the Vashon Heritage Museum talk on Vashon potters in the 1970s through the 1980s. I'm Elsa Kronquist, the Executive Director of the Heritage Museum. And we have a reminder that your microphone is muted for this talk. If you have a question, please type it in the chat function and we will answer almost all questions at the end of the presentation. I'd like to take a moment and say thank you to For Culture for sponsoring this museum talk and our whole series. Thank you very much, For Culture. Next slide, please. At this time, I will introduce Chris Austin, who is a Heritage Museum board member, co-host for this museum talk, and host of our radio show, History Worth Hearing. Chris will tell us a little about Lucy Duran, a notable person in Vashon history, and acknowledge the first Vashon Native people through reading our land acknowledgement statement. Chris?
Thank you, Elsa. Yes, I'd like to say a little bit about the woman on the screen here, Lucy Duran. She is a very important figure in the history of our islands. She was born on Vashon in about 1843. And one of her most important contributions was she was a star witness in the 1927 land claims tribunals, and that she provided the most complete information that we have about the Shwabop's Native people on Vashon. She died on Vashon in January of 1929, and she was buried in the Vashon Cemetery, but her grave was unmarked until 2008, when a headstone was placed on her grave in a ceremony that included the Puyallup tribe of Indians as well as Islanders. So very important. Now for the land acknowledgement. The Vashon Heritage Museum stands on the ancestral lands of the Shwabop's or Swiftwater people who inhabited Vashon Maury Island for millennia. The Donation Land Claim Act encouraged large numbers of Euro-American settlers to claim this land even before the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854 extinguished native claims to it. The Shwabop's were forcibly removed and relocated onto nearby reservations, including Puyallup, Nisqually, Squaxin Island, and Muckleshoot. We acknowledge the people of the Puyallup tribe whose stewardship of and relationship with Vashon Maury Island continues today. We commit to amplify the voices of Indigenous people, making space for them to tell their own story, both past and present, in our exhibits and programs. Thank you.
Now the Vashon Heritage Museum Inclusion Pledge. Next slide. The Vashon Maury Island Heritage Museum rejects racism, discrimination, and hate. Our purpose is to honor stories of love, oppression, action, and resilience. Stories that give voice to all, examine hard questions about social, economic, and environmental justice, and reveal racism and oppression within our heritage. We pledge that everything we do will honor the island's diversity, cultures, and histories. Next slide, please. So we've got a busy next couple of months coming up. We'd like to invite everyone to the museum to view and listen to our current mini exhibit produced in partnership with the Audubon Society on Vashon birds and their songs. The exhibit will be up now through the end of April. And then in May, as part of a clay extravaganza month on Vashon, the Vashon Heritage Museum will open the special mini exhibit, Vashon Pottery from the 70s and 80s, an exhibit of pottery made by potters working with clay during those times. The exhibit will include the early Vashon brickworks and Akio Takamori's history on Vashon. This opens first Friday, May 6th, with a special reception for potters from 5 to 6 and will run through May 29th. And was there anything that you wanted to add, Chris?
Oh, yes, and thank you. One quick one that didn't get made on the slide was at the Vashon Theater on April 26th at 6 p.m. is a film, a Japanese-American presence on Vashon, and it covers their presence here from 1900 to 2019. It's a very good piece.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for our history talks, starting in May, you'll be able to join us in person or on Zoom as Michael Mead presents a talk on the spirit of place and the importance of preserving stories and myths in our society. We'll be sending out more information on this special talk and how you can register to join us on Zoom or join us in person at the Land Trust Building. Then in June, our talk will be a panel discussion on the gentrification of Vashon Island. Watch for more information on that talk. Tonight, next slide, please, Chris. Tonight, our panelist will take a look at how the pottery scene was developed on Vashon in the 1980s and 70s and 80s. Hear the stories of those early potters as they built their kilns, their studios, and their community that developed the Vashon Potters Tour that has now become the Vashon Studio Tour. Tonight's moderator is Elizabeth Shepard. She is the editor of the Vashon Maury Island Beachcomber. Prior to serving as editor, she was the newspaper's art editor and then a general assignment reporter. Shepard has also had a long career in the arts and film, working as the director of youth programs for Northwest Film Forum in Seattle from 2006 to 2021. She is a lifelong lover and supporter of the arts. And our panel tonight, Chris Beck is a ceramic artist and photographer. Her work has been exhibited in such locations as the Henry Gallery, the King County Arts Commission, Vashon Gather, and the Pacific Northwest Crafts Gallery. Beck has also been an instructor for the National Endowment for the Arts, Cornish Arts Institute, and Vashon Allied Arts, Arts in Schools. Greg McElroy is one of the 6 original potters who originated the first Potters Tour in 1980. He began teaching at Vashon High School in 1995, has since retired, and continues to create pottery in his studio. Irene Otis. Irene has been creating colorful ceramic tiles, often emblazed with inspirational text for more than 30 years on Vashon. Marla Smith is a potter and photographer. She describes her work as classic and classy with a sense of humor. Welcome, Liz, and our panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm so glad that this is such a big crowd here, and we're just looking forward to hearing from these wonderful people who have helped make our art scene what it is today and fashioned it by hand as it happened. So thank you for coming. And we have I just want to jump right in, start talking to all of you. And I have some questions, and I'm sure that the audience will have questions too. And so please do put those into the chat, and I'll try to keep track of them, and so will everybody else, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the evening. I want to talk. We're going to just talk to each person here, and I just have a few questions. The same questions for all of them. I want to know, as we all do as islanders, how, first of all, how they came to be here, how we got so lucky, how this happened. And so I'm going to start with Irene. Irene, can you tell us when you got here, how you got here, what it was like when you came, who was here? Those are a lot of questions. I'm throwing them all at you at one time. But if you could start with that, and then I'd also like to hear about your work as well. And I have a final question I'll keep secret till the end. So Irene?
I was very glad to be here. And also, not to argue, but I've been making tiles for 45 years. So maybe I look a lot younger. I don't know. But anyway, I moved here in 1970. And I came onto the island with a husband and a 6-year-old daughter, and that daughter is now 58. And so I was in my early 20s, and I didn't know a lot, and I certainly wasn't a potter. And I want to just express gratitude for Vashon. And I also want to just say that I feel extremely blessed that I was born into a time where I moved on to Vashon. I came here in a $250 Comet station wagon with all our worldly possessions in it. We had friends who lived on Vashon. They let us camp for a while, and then we squatted in a cabin, an abandoned cabin,
Wow.
and we lived in that cabin until it got too cold. And then I moved in, the family moved into a $60 a month rental that I rented $60 a month for 20 years. And those times that I am so grateful that I had that opportunity, because my business and my tiles, it wouldn't have developed if I'd had high overhead. And I really have always loved clay. And I had an opportunity because I lived at the north end of Vashon. I would walk over and walk up. There was a Seattle pottery, City of Seattle pottery on Thistle in West Seattle. And I was able to walk there, and I got a job mixing glazes and kind of being a clay assistant. And I did that for 3 years. And that's when I kind of figured out different clays, and eventually that led to tiles. So that was the very beginning. And that led, I did my first open house. I had a little Seattle following, and I was beginning to do the tiles. And I had my first open studio in 1978. And I did it at Christmas, and I did it at Valentine's Day. And then it folded over, more people joined, and we went to some different places. I can remember doing it in where the Heritage Museum is, and I believe that could have been 1980, 81. So I have such a sense of gratitude for all of these wonderful people, and that I've known them for forever. And I went a pretty specialized route in that after, it didn't take too long before I was buying glazed or unglazed bisque tiles and just directly working with the tiles. And then I focused on the tile making aspect of it. And it moved pretty quickly because I began to do shows. I did the Bellevue Arts and Crafts Fair starting in 1980. And then I had a chance to do a tile apprenticeship on the East Coast at the Moravian Pottery and Tile Works outside of Philadelphia. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about production and mold making, and just a lot of technical stuff that I then used down the road. And that was the first year where I was back east doing the school, and my family did the Bellevue Arts and Crafts Fair.
Oh, okay.
While I was back doing that. So things began to move quickly. And in 1982, I did my first wholesale trade show. It was an American Craft Council show. I mean, I just kind of like, oh my God, how did I do all this? But this is what built the business. And I began to have employees, and I've had some wonderful people help me over the years. And then I bought an acre of land and started to think about getting out of the rental. And so I built a home and studio in 1990. And then continuing to do the trade shows. And after a while, I began to kind of get a little worn down. and I downsized by attrition and the economy, where there was a recession, 2008, 2009, and it all kind of worked to bring the business down. And I still am doing it. I still have my kilns in the basement, and my studio is in the basement. I live above it. And I am just so grateful. I have, I guess, there's many tiles out there. People always ask, well, how many, but there's thousands and thousands, and they bring me work. Like, people, if you go on the internet and you put in Irene and tiles, you'll eventually come to a pretty outdated but serviceable website that will put you in contact with me. And so that's how I get my orders, through people who've seen them, and a lot of reorders. And I just recently completed a 70 tile job for our Vashon Athletic Club, which
Wow.
I'm really proud of. And I have tiles in the library, tiles at Docton Park, some wonderful tiles at the Senior Center, the story of life at the Senior Center. So I have just a huge amount of gratitude for Vashon and the people that have helped me every step of the way. And I still have tiles at Saw and at Gather. And I did my last Strawberry Festival not that long ago. I missed one, and then there was the pandemic, but I've done Strawberry Festivals for 30 or 40 years.
Wow.
Just
Wow. That's
regular. So that's, I think I've wrapped it up, Liz.
5 minutes. 5 minutes. We get to hear about this whirlwind that really started and hasn't stopped. And I mean, it's slowed. It's different now, and
Yeah.
certainly in the last few years, it's been different. But I think that what's exciting is all this work just has kept being created all these years. It's amazing, Irene. You're
I'm very
a force
grateful.
of nature.
Well, 74. So, and retirement has not happened here yet. And but what I'm grateful for is that I'm able to, I'm able to live here, and it's just been a beautiful place to be during the pandemic.
Mhm.
Vashon is an amazing place to live, and I really want to thank all the potters, all the tile people, and just for those of you out there, because this, and I don't know if this is backwards, although I think the writing, you can read it.
We can read it.
Yeah, magic is in believing, which is an old tile, and then this one, just a reminder to all of us: have faith. Spring happens, folks.
Yeah,
So-
today it was snowed, Irene.
I know. So
Today
Yeah.
it snowed on Vashon in April. Unheard of.
I know. I just want to thank you, Liz. So I hope that was I did it
Ooh,
quick and
yeah,
dirty here. So
It was good. It was good. It was good. I'm gonna ask Marla to speak next. And it's the same sort of thing, but I would like to know, how this place appeared to you when you got here. What did it feel like to be here? I mean, it was affordable. It was rural. It was so different than it is now. And I suppose I'd like to know who else was here with you. I mean, you'll tell your story as you want, but these are the things that I'm hoping to hear, as well as about your work, and how that. I'd like to hear you talk about it yourself, Marla.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Seattle, and I had been all over to many islands, but I had never ever been to Vashon. Nobody even talked about it. And I dropped out of college and went to the Factory of Visual Art because I had discovered clay, and a woman there, all of us on the panel know her. May she rest in peace. Leela Miller, a force to be reckoned with, saw my pots and wanted to find out who I was. And her friend Monty had built a studio here and was leaving. And so she asked me if I wanted to come out here. And then I said, yes, I came out here with her. Then she went to Mexico and told me that I had to keep coming out here, even if she wasn't here. And I didn't know anybody, and nobody seemed to be too interested in me. And she told me that that I needed to hitchhike here. And so I had a little car. Irene, you'll love this. It's a little old Datsun that I named Scut, and like the kilns. And it was one of those $500 cars. So I abandoned the hitchhiking thing, but I just kept coming out, even though it was kind of weird. I just kept coming out. And eventually, so this place, and Monty is going to come to to our evening. Monty built a kiln that, I mean, it's like everything out here at the time that I loved. It was a kiln that ran on diesel. Our house had only wood heat. We had a wringer washer. We drove old cars. We had no cameras. We did not have a phone in the house. And we loved it. It was fabulous. You know, we were, I mean, poor Vashon at the time, because we all came at a relatively the same time. And there were a lot of counterculture people.
Mhm.
And by a lot of standards, we are conservative, there was a rowdy group here. And so I'm sure that the Vashon people, it was a way more of a family community, like what did we find? What did I find when I came here? Half as many people, way more families,
Mhm.
and all the fancy houses were all tucked away. All the houses around were old houses that you could live in. We rented our house for $75. And potters need space and buildings. Old dilapidated outbuildings, chicken sheds are really great. Old falling down barns work really well. And so that was out here. And we could actually, do all the messy stuff that is clay. In our situation, with our kiln, it was a sooty mess. Nobody would let anybody do that now. And yet, it was a free for all, and the air was so clean that we didn't feel, oh, well, what's a little soot,
Right.
And so it was, I don't know, I guess knowing there was somewhat of a tribal feeling for those of us who were counterculture. And I liked it. Sometimes, life was so hard because we were broke. It was, against all odds, and having to get the gas in the car to go sell pots in Issaquah. Even going down to Dockton, we lived on Gorsuch Road in an old homestead there with an old orchard. To go down to Dockton was a huge trip. Could we, that's a lot of gas to go down there. We would have to have many things to do in order to go down to Dockton.
No.
So it was a real different feeling at that point. Kimmel's was the store.
Mhm.
A lot of people looked askance, but we didn't care. We were all together, and there were dime beers on Tuesday nights at the tavern, which was when all the crazies came out, and it was a gas. And I was in my early 20s, so all I wanted to do was make pots. And that's all we did was make pots. And that's all everybody who was making pots then, we were all in our 20s. We just made pots all the time.
Wow. How many? Okay, so set the stage for me in terms of the number of people in the scene. I mean, when did it turn out to be that how many people were in this scene at this time that you're describing in the early years?
I mean, the scene being the island,
The
or the scene
pottery,
being the pottery where I
the
lived?
hippie pottery scene,
Yeah,
the sort of counterculture pottery scene, or just the pottery scene.
I counted 13 who were
Okay.
all here. So see, that's the unusual thing. It seems to me that there were no potters here. And I mean, there were potters, probably, I'm sure there were people who worked with clay, and who knows, maybe they'll pop up. But Monty Levine built this kiln in 1969. Vashon Allied Arts actually was looking for a teacher. There were a couple of people, I don't know how many people were in VAA at the time, but they looked for a teacher. And so they asked Gene at Pottery Northwest, and Monty said yes. He's a very adventurous soul. He said yes, he'd do it. So he came out here and taught a class and continued to teach, and then just, through sheer will, got boiler bricks from old World War II ships that were being dismantled in Tacoma. And he gave housing and guidance to two young people who were very young, Randy and Jeannie. Jeannie is still making beads. She has made millions upon millions of beads. And Marcy, a fabulous potter, was here. Leela, a fabulous potter, and I would say my mentor. She and I loved clay in the same way. And who else? Carl Fuss, a really good potter, came and went. And then there were all of the other folks who had their potteries. And by my standard, everybody else's pottery was way more together than ours.
Mhm.
They had fabulous kilns with doors, and people made all sorts of different kinds of pots, and we all appreciated everybody else's pots.
So there wasn't a sense of competition, and there wasn't a sense of, you know, uh-oh, this person has arrived now, you know. Was there anything like that? Was it was a collaborative group of people?
It was. I remember the Towles when the Towsleys came. It was kind of getting at the end of when I was there, and they came and they built a kiln right away. And it was this great big giant kiln, and we were in awe. You know, how do you
Yeah.
do that? How do you have the wherewithal to do that? And they're still producing, and they started producing then. But no, I don't know. I don't think this is being too corny, but potters really appreciate other potters,
Mhm.
because Greg and I were talking about the weight. You know, all it is moving around weight, basically. And it's a lot of hard work, and a lot of times things go bad at the very last minute when you least expect it.
Mm.
And potters really really care for each other. We appreciate each other.
Hmm. Thank you, Marla. That's fantastic. I mean, I'm getting the vibes now. I'm really starting to feel what it was like in those days. And Chris,
Yeah.
Chris, my friend, what was the art scene like in those days when you arrived? The
Well,
whole.
I showed up in about 72, 71. My dad had moved over here. And actually, I found out from Bruce Holland, my dad had been here before when he opened the Dairy Queen here back in like 60 or 50 or something like that. Couldn't believe it. Later Island Queen, now Island Queen.
Wow.
Um, when I came, it was everybody was looking for the same thing, I think. Sort of 5 acres, independence, chicken coop, which is what I ended up with. Um, place to build a kiln. You know, the studio came first, the house came second. We rented first from the Sestrats
Mhm.
up at Wax Orchards and picked fruit when we were broke. And I'd come here from Cornish with Joe Wheeler, who I'd married there. And we stayed married until about 79 and had a big kiln on Wax Orchards. And then finally built it down here. I met Janice Mullen actually on Wax Orchards. She flew in and saw the kiln and came over. So the atmosphere early on in the early 70s was kind of like, I think we scared everybody, you know, that was here before. You know, the counterculture moved and we sort of scared people. The people who lived on Vashon forever, the farmers, the regular people. And then they figured out we were okay. We were not too totally weird. And finally we became sort of the regular, we became the norm. My work has always been in porcelain from the beginning, hasn't changed. And over time, Joe Wheeler and I split up in 79. By 86, I decided I needed to make some money. So like Greg going to work at the school. At some point, you get tired of moving this stuff around. And I became a legal investigator for about 20 years, 25 years. And then came back to the studio 10, 15 years ago, I think. Still in porcelain, pretty hard edge. I mean, my stuff and Marla's couldn't be more different. Marla has a flair for hand building that I don't have, for modeling that I don't have. My work is hard edged. It's my studies were chemistry, glazes, all that sort of stuff. And porcelain to me is very unforgiving. You either do it or it ends up flat on the kiln floor. So, oop, excuse me, I set a
Well,
timer and forgot.
I could listen forever to these days. It seems like such a different place. I mean, I was not here then. I was moved here in the late 90s, like a lot of people did. But you know, it seems like you're describing a sort of this incubator for art, incubator for community, incubator for really building something that we now are seeing, maybe what was built by a lot of different artists who arrived here during that time. So that's really interesting to me. Greg, it's your turn. And so
I think the art scene got bigger in '79
Mhm,
when Vashon Allied Arts got expanded.
mhm,
The Arts Resource Center was opened. It became 2D and 3D, not just potters.
mhm,
You know, it's gone on to become something else.
mhm.
But during the time it was the Vashon Allied Arts, which it still is legally, it was the best of times.
So there was this infrastructure, like all of a sudden now there was an organization that could support. It wasn't
It
just,
was,
but yeah.
the organization was always there.
Right, but it evolved. It wasn't an organization that was serving necessarily its highest place.
It
And
had
so
it had
people
served for
came
a long
along.
time. It had
Mhm,
served for a long time, but like any organization, it lost energy.
mhm.
And so they had this great 501c3 and only 5 ladies handling the whole thing. And I never met a 501c3 that I didn't like. So there was a lot to do with it.
There was a lot to do with it, yeah. And then there
But
was,
the fun part is the grassroots, Liz.
mhm.
The grassroots of it. You know, the whole, once the big structure is formed and everything's organized and orchestrated and perfect, it's not fun anymore.
Mhm, mhm. Greg, yeah, I
Yes.
give you the time is flying by us.
Okay. Well, I'll try to
Go
keep
for
it tight. The way we got over here is that my wife Janice and I grew up in LA and couldn't wait to get out of there after we got married. And so we moved up to Seattle because there was this place called Pottery Northwest
Mhm.
where I knew I could work at being a potter, which is what I decided I wanted to do. And the way I got to Vashon was through Mike Mead. When Mike ran he was just a simple shopkeeper running the Mingle Mint before he was Michael Mead.
Mhm.
And he came by a studio that I was working in and said, "Hey, would you guys like to put some pots in my shop over on Vashon?" And we said, "Of course." And so we came out here to look for a place that we wanted to be out of the city and found some pretty cheap rundown places here and bought one of those cheap rundown places. And as Marla said, the outbuildings were more important than the house. Or was that Chris? One of you guys. Anyway, and it did have an outbuilding that I could turn into a studio. And I did know Leela from Pottery Northwest, so there was a little connection there. And then I got out here and started building a studio and realized that I had to do, because we didn't have any money, I had to do all the work. So as you other potters know, you become a carpenter, a plumber, an electrician, a mason, a glaze chemist, a mechanic, do R&D, do sales, and in your spare time, you make pottery. There was a great community of potters. Certainly the folks at Vashon Pottery, Marla and Leela, Brandy, Jean, who else? Bob and Fred, and you know, those folks, they were just there, and I know I could go up there anytime and just hang out. Or what also was nice is that if I needed, you know, 10 pounds of silica, I could go over there and say, hey, could I have 10 pounds of silica for my glazes? And they said, yeah, sure, here you go. So I didn't have to make a trip into town. And they could, of course, could do the same thing. They could come over and borrow whatever they wanted. And I met Chris and Joe. I'm not sure exactly how, but they were up at Wax Orchards, and which was really close to us, and got to know them and got to know Irene. I'm not sure how that happened either exactly, but I did get to know her. And also a little later on became very good friends with Pat Cummings when she and her husband and family moved here. So I started making pottery. I did primarily stoneware and started doing lots of arts and crafts fairs everywhere, all over the state of Washington, down into Oregon. I think I might have gotten to Idaho once, but that was a whole nother deal. And plus I had to find stores, craft shops to sell stuff in too. So there was Minglemet, which was great, and a few other places around Seattle and Tacoma that turned out okay. But after a while, you know, I like to tell people that being a smartass, that I was making too much money and not working enough hours, which of course is completely the opposite. So I was getting a little burned out on doing, you know, trying to make a living doing this. And we had three wonderful daughters who have now turned into these three amazing women. And so I had to make a living. You know, Janice worked too, but we need more than one income. So eventually I said, I dusted off this teaching certificate that I had from California and started doing some substituting, and realized I kind of liked hanging around with a bunch of teenagers, and got a job eventually at Vashon High School and did that for about 18 years. It was really hard to do pottery and be a teacher at the same time. It was just too much. So I basically did pottery in the summertime. And since I've retired, I still make some pottery, but not as often. I guess I have turned my creative bent more into music, which is also something that was from the past that I kind of rekindled. But you know, the scene here on Vashon was amazing to me, having grown up in a big city, and just to find people who were I was really comfortable with, that had really the same kind of desires that I did, to basically spend all day long in their studios making pots, you know. So, and that's what we did. And I couldn't wait in the morning to get out in my studio and get to work. And pottery is one of those things where you can't just do it and then walk away from it for a week. You have to keep the flow going, or it doesn't work. So how's that? Got any more questions? Is that fast enough?
That was fast enough. But, you know, I sort of want to, you know, it's so fascinating to me how you describe a place that doesn't really seem like it exists anymore. You know, where can we move to, how, you know, how if what has remained here, what has remained here, I guess it's a broader discussion, but what your hopes are, I guess, for Vashon's art scene, pottery scene, those who come here to be artists. What are your hopes going forward? And what part of your legacy would you like to make sure remains here? I guess is the obvious question I'd like to ask all of you.
Ooh, a legacy. That's a little frightening to think. I mean, I've never thought of like myself being an artist. I was just a potter.
Mhm.
So I never looked at it as being an art. I like to make things that were nice, but I also wanted to make things that you could use, you know, that people enjoy using. And as far as what's going on now, I know it would be a lot harder now just because of the, I guess, the gentrification of Vashon Island. But the people are still here. Irene, Marla, Chris, Janice Malman and John Sage. And then there's some other potters too, like Judith, Gail over in Docton. And what's your other studio partner, Marla?
Liz Lewis.
Well, Liz, of course, yes. And Liz
Karen.
and,
And Karen.
yes,
Fiegel.
Karen, okay. Yeah, but there are still, you know, and that's what it is, it's the people, not so much as, you know, what else is around here, but these people are still here. And I
Right.
know plenty of people who have been here for a while and are still doing what they love to do.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
whether it be art or music or whatever, photography, yeah.
It's somehow will remain possible. Anybody else have any thoughts on legacy? I mean, I don't want to. I'm not suggesting that what you're doing is over by any means, because hey, I'm really excited. I want to just mention this before I forget. I'm really excited about May, because May is going to be old home week all month here. You know, it's going to be, we're also going to have a Barnworks survivors show at the hardware store. We're having the studio art tours back finally after this God-forsaken long pandemic loss that we've had of being able to go to studios and visit. We're going to be people are going to be doing that in May, and then we have this pottery extravaganza going on in May at so many different locations. So I guess what I'm going to say is you're all still wonderfully here, and not all, but many of you are here. And I sort of, you know, I guess the question is, how does this continue to go forward? How does it continue? What wisdom could you give people who come here now? Or
Well, you know, just for potters, not artists, like
Mhm.
I'm like Greg, I don't necessarily think about myself as an artist,
I love how
but for potters,
Mhm.
it is really hard to be here. I mean, I don't think, to tell you the truth, unless you have a trust fund, you can't come here and be a potter.
Mhm.
It would be really, really tricky. We were lucky, like Arlene says, you know, we're so grateful. We just happened to stumble in
Mhm.
here, led here at that time. It would be pottery, you know, clay is a big production. It's a very big production, even if you do it as down and dirty as you can. And so I don't know, it sounds, you know, kind of pessimistic, but I don't know how a person would come out and do what we were able to do.
Right.
I'd agree with you.
Yeah,
It's too expensive. You know, you can't afford to buy a house here. You can't afford to buy a studio. You can't afford to buy a chicken coop.
Mhm.
You know, the
Mhm.
chicken coops are going for more than my house was.
Yeah.
And not to mention the utilities, the
Well,
kilns.
maybe it's a too depressing of a question, but I just I had to ask it because again, I'm just struck by this economics of it, of the affordability of it, made arts possible, and yet somehow that is, what do we do now? What do we do now? How do we keep this alive and not ending? Because how do we create opportunities at this point? I don't know the answer. I want
We
to.
talk about that a lot with Viva, don't we, Marla? I
Yep.
mean, we talk a lot about how to bring in the new artists, how to support the new artists, how to help them. And we're baffled, actually, I think, how to help people move here, be here, thrive here without 2 jobs or 3 jobs.
Mhm.
I mean, I didn't leave pottery because I was making money hand over fist. I became an investigator because I needed to make money,
Right,
like Greg, to support a family.
right.
And that was back then.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to open this up a little bit more to the to the folks who are here tonight, who have come, and I have some questions that I'd like to just throw out to all of you. And the first question is from Keith Pryor, and he wants to know: have any of you attempted to work in the clays of Vashon?
Everybody's thought about it.
Yeah,
Everybody knows that they melt and they become flat as a pancake, and they are not functional. You can't use it. I mean, unless
it's
one of you has had more success than I have.
it's a clay that's good for making red bricks. I tried to do some stuff with it, and it just didn't work. I mean, first of all, you have to process the clay. It means you have to dig it up. It's full of rocks and sticks and stuff like that. So you have to process it, and then what you end up with is not worth the time and effort you put into it.
You know who was really good with that was Leela. Leela would throw together fireplace ashes and a little bentonite, a little kaolin, and then this clay that we had been sitting around and pulverized. And actually the pot that's going to be in the exhibit has that glaze on it. She would make this funky green glaze. That's what it's good for.
Interesting. So I have another question from Lynn, and would like to know your stories of Akio when he was here and producing ceramics. Do any of you, did you know him, and can you tell us about your time with him?
Yeah, I knew him. He lived just down the street from me. So, I mean, I wouldn't say I knew him well, but we got together a couple times. He needed something, I don't remember exactly. He was building a kiln and needed some sort of advice of some kind. So I went down and helped him with that. I don't think we hung out really, but I knew who he was, and I admired his work. And he was doing some amazing things and had some great stories about growing up. His father was a dermatologist, I think, and his office and their home was right next to I think it was like a house of ill repute in Japan. So the ladies would come over with skin issues, I guess.
Oh,
So he saw some things when he was growing up.
interesting. So you learned that. Does
Yeah.
anybody else have a knockout story?
I didn't know him.
Who else? Who? If you could think back to a person, some of you touched on this when you were talking, a person who was here who was probably the most, I mean, I'm asking you to play favorites, but the most inspirational community member who was from these days and these times to you, and why they meant so much to you. Is that too much of a favorites question to ask?
Well, I'm going to jump in here, and I'm going to put a plug in for a woman named Sharon Munger. And she has the Barn Works, and I stayed with her when I came up in the $250 Comet. And Sharon way back, this was 1975, she started a boutique business, and there were several island women. I won't name names, but just there was 5 women, and we sold those boutique shirts at the University Street Fair, at Folk Life, at Bumbershoot, and Sharon taught me the ropes. And then I had a kiln and I was starting to do ceramics, but she went on to have the Barn Works, and she's a force of nature, and she's very generous and very, very, very caring. And she's a mentor for me. That's for darn sure. And Sharon, if you're out there, we love you. So thank you.
Yeah. There's a, I'm looking around my house, and everywhere I go, I mean, I'm gonna mention Liz Lewis here because there is, I don't know of a house that doesn't have the Liz Lewis pottery made by children at the schools, in the schools here. I don't know who doesn't have those frogs or whatever it was that year. We all have it, and none of us can ever get rid of it because it's our beautiful children made it, and I think that it's just such a testament to her and her work. And tell me, I mean, I'm interested about teaching. I mean, all of you have you all had experience teaching, or not?
Well, there's the artist in the schools, and
Mhm.
I for several years, probably more than I want to even go back, but did tile making with the high school, the junior high, and the elementary schools, and that was with the the program Candy Gamble, where you have artists in residence in the schools, and
Right.
And Greg knows way more than I do. So, but no, it's a real vital thing. And I have worked with a lot of kids. So,
And I think that program is still going strong and providing opportunity. I mean, it's a really admirable program. I think makes our schools better, much better, to have these sort of residencies with artists still ongoing. And so that's just something I really applaud, that is still happening. And of course, my children were raised on it. So I
No,
appreciate
I
that.
taught at Cornish and National Endowment, but I have to agree with you, Liz. Liz Lewis is the best teacher I've ever known.
Mm.
I've watched her teach. I listened to her teach. She just has the knack. She has the talent. You have to love it, and she loves it.
Mhm. And
She,
she takes such, I mean, I think that she really fosters this sort of creative excitement in children. They're so proud of it. And they really understand. I mean, to me, with my children and others as well, they understand that they've made a work of art and what that means to make something that is a work of art. And so that's what I think that's another reason that none of us can ever uh, clear the shelves of those dusty Liz Lewis creations that our children brought home. So it's so
And
special.
oh, I'm sorry. I just saw that Ann Spires said that, our legacy is our children.
Mhm.
And that's true. The artists in the schools, all of the children whom Liz taught, I was lucky enough to teach with her. And it's really fun. Everything that the kids made had integrity.
Yeah.
It all was purposeful. And so the children who are lucky enough to grow up here,
Mhm.
they have that in them, and they will take it out and do whatever they want wherever they go, but they'll always have that in them.
Maybe we're getting close to the legacy here. I think maybe my legacy question, but I think that these people, you all, this whole sort of creative nurturing of that has happened to so many young people on Vashon, where your work in the schools as a teacher, you're excellent. I think maybe that's where we're getting close to it. I'm going to read what Anne wrote because everything she writes is beautiful, is it not? So she said, all our children are our legacy. They spent time in what they called art houses, all of us dedicated to our craft in the midst of our days. And kitchens, chicken coops, schools. They carry our legacy out of Vashon. Come on, Anne. How did that's beautiful. And I really do believe it's true. So does anybody else? We're nearing our time together. Did does anybody, do we have any more questions out there from the people who've joined us here tonight?
You know,
While
I
you're
have
taking,
one thing. Oh,
okay, while you're taking questions, I just want to give a shout out to Mike Mead in that, you know,
Yeah.
he did something for a lot of artists on the island, a lot of craftspeople, is that he provided a place where they could sell their stuff and help them make a living. Now, you know, it's not an artistic thing, but it's so important. If any of us had wanted to do this more, we have to be able to support ourselves, you know? I mean, otherwise you just fill up your studio with pots and they just sit there. So, you know, which gets kind of old. So if I'm going to make a living at this as a craftsperson, it has to go someplace. It can't stay in my studio.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's
And Mike
true.
was a big part of that before he became Michael Mead.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
and Minglement was part of the community. The community would not
Absolutely.
have been the same without Mike Mead. And the community, you know, I just need to say a quick disclaimer.
Uh-huh.
There is another Marla Smith,
yes.
and I get credited with her photography. She grew up on Vashon. She married a Smith. She also has a daughter named Grace, like I do. She's the photographer, and she's a fabulous photographer. Not me.
oh, thank you.
This Marla Smith is a potter.
Yes.
And Liz, you've got a bunch of questions in the Q&A.
Okay, I'm only seeing the chat.
Okay.
And so,
Well, we've got 3 questions from Pamela Hallman. What is the biggest change you've seen in Vashon and the Vashon arts community? She also is asking, what advice would you give to emerging potters on Vashon today?
mhm.
And Pam saying, what is your most memorable Vashon moment? And then we have a question from a Keith Kirkwood. Why can't we see the artwork of the artists here today? And then Palash is telling us, hi, all. Thank you for doing this. I have a question. Does any one of you wood fire? So
Wow.
that's
I wish I'm not seeing that. I thought that the questions were going to be typed in. I don't know where oh, I see it now. Never mind. Okay, good.
You got it, Liz?
I
Thanks.
got it now. Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so that's, can we go a little bit over? These are a lot of questions, and I'd like to stay if everybody else can stay for a little while longer. Is that all right?
Yeah, I can answer the wood-fired one.
Mm-hmm.
The only person I know that did wood fire on the island is Eric Nelson. And he built a Japanese climbing kiln, and it's an incredible amount of work to do wood firing. So it's probably, you know, for all of us anyway, we use gas or electricity, as it's so much easier.
And what is the, let's go to there's another question over here as well. The type of kilns, someone wanted to know about the type of kilns, the kind of kilns you were using. What kind of communal kiln space might there have been back then? And is there any such thing now?
I shared kilns with Janice Mullen and some others. I have a 35-foot cubic foot soft brick lined hard brick exterior sprung arch kiln. And I finally sold that about 7 years ago. Actually, I sold 1 million bricks and an arch form, and that was about it. But yeah, and even that was a lot of work. Remember the kiln shelves? Because of the silicone carbide kiln shelves that you could barely lift?
I originally built a hard brick kiln, which takes a lot of fuel to make it, to fire it. And then I went to a soft brick kiln, which fired wonderfully. And I now have a ceramic fiber kiln, which is great. and it's smaller than any of the kilns I've ever had before. I actually bought the Towsley's kiln when they moved off the island, but it was a 60 cubic foot downdraft car kiln, and it took me forever to fill it. It fired beautifully, but it was just too big for one person, or at least for this person.
Hmm.
So I sold it.
As far as community kilns, because I work at Liz's and she has been a teacher, she's retired from teaching. And people ask all the time about does she fire for people, and we refer off island. To get a community pottery space together, it could be done. It's just an enormous amount of work. And the recycling aspect, it's not a static art. Everything has to be recycled. Glazes have to be recycled. Clay has to be recycled. And it's a huge, I mean, if young people got together and did it, they could do it. But nobody in this, I'll speak for everybody, nobody in this group would ever want to start a cooperative pottery. It's a huge undertaking.
Pottery Northwest over in Seattle is a place where you can do cooperative stuff, you know, and it's a great place.
Right. And Rain City now in West Seattle.
Oh, okay.
Someone, there's a few more questions here. Any more on kilns and with community kilns or any? That's good. So I guess just if we could do a lightning round of like Pam Holman's question, what is the biggest change you've seen in the Vashon community? Just in a sentence, each one of you.
I would say money.
Is it money? For
Yeah, a lot more money here than there used to be, even with inflation, you know.
Anybody else?
The demographics have changed. It used to be families, like I said before, there was families and families and families. And so that has changed. You know, I think that there are more wealthy people here. Some people buy homes here and don't live here. There seems to be more and more of that. So I would say demographics and money.
I think humility, grassroots and humility. I think we had that when we were young. I think we had it when we were building an arts community. I don't see it now.
How can it be fostered again, Chris?
I actually don't know, because the other two factors that Greg and Marla mentioned, money and demographics, are a huge contributor.
Yeah, I mean, look at the average age on Vashon now. What is it, like 55 or something like that, or more?
Over 55.
No offense, but those are a bunch of old people, you know.
Actually, we're the oldest demographic in the county.
Yeah.
On the island.
And those people are all settled or retired. They don't have young children. So it's yeah, it's a different kind of place now. Yeah. I mean, who here could afford to buy their house now? Nope.
And so Keith Kirkwood wants to know why we're not seeing your artwork right now and on the Zoom. And we came to talk for the most part. We had I'll try to answer it. We thought we had so much to talk about that, and there were some crossed wires. We were going to show off a little bit more than we intended to show some work if the artists wanted, if the potters wanted to, as we went along. But we had a little technical snafu, so we've just talked instead. And I've been grateful for the talk, but I would encourage everyone to come out to the History Museum on First Friday, because I think that there will be a lot more examples there. I would encourage the studio art tour. I mean, there's nothing like seeing art in person. It is not the same to see it to see something that you can sense the texture of, that you know the size of, that you're I'm just so excited to be to personally be able to feel comfortable enough to go on the studio tour this year. And I would encourage everyone to do that. There'll be more talks at VCA. There's the wonderful show at the hardware store of the Barnworks group, which we've talked about. And I would just really encourage people to go out and see it if they can. Also, I can refer you to Viva, right, Chris? Because if you want to, it's a wonderful website to explore, and there you can contact any artist on Vashon through it. You can find their
And
website.
anybody on the studio tour is on the website right now.
Mhm. So everything is there. So this is a great place to look at art, and I would encourage it highly. I also just wanted, we tried so hard at the Beachcomber to talk about shows that are coming up, and we try to do a good job in still covering arts, despite the fact that the Beachcomber has changed too, and we don't have quite as many employees as we used to. But we're, I would encourage people to read the Beachcomber. I have to do that, right? Because we do try to cover the arts in full and in depth at the local newspaper. So that's a good source of information as well about where you can go out and see art these days. Anything else to add? We're 5 minutes over our time.
Thank you so much for your graceful moderation.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's my first time, and I'm a little intimidated by all of you genius.
This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been great to hang out with you guys. And like I said, I'll see you in May. I'll be out and about, I hope.
Thank you all. I really enjoyed hanging out with you guys.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you all. I'm glad we're still all here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
You
Hope
all.
we answered all your questions. I don't think we did. Hi from Port Townsend. Good to see you all. Pat Cummings Bolin. Thank you so much. I truly love learning about your life and work. Blessings all around. Thanks so much to everyone. So,
Hey, bye.
Right.
You all. Good
Thank-
night.
Thank you, Elsa.
night.
Thank you so
Good
much.
night.
Thanks for bringing the history to us.
And
Thank
this will all be recorded and on our Vashon Heritage website in about a week, sometime early next week.
Fantastic.
See you all at the museum.
Okay.
Bye.